Hey, everybody, and welcome into another installment of the Mainly Broncos podcast. And we have an exciting show for you guys today. One that, is amazing because we have a Manning joining the show. Probably the best Manning. Well, I will just say this, probably appropriate Broncos-wise, that a Manning is writing for us over at Predominantly Orange. Like, actually on the Denver Broncos, it's appropriate for two Mannings actually to be writing over with us over at Predominantly Orange. But it's exciting for me to have Shelby Manning join the Mainly Broncos podcast. Matty Moles could not be here tonight, unfortunately. He's dealing with a little bit of some migraines, but nonetheless, Shelby, you're here. You guys can follow her over on Twitter at Shelby Manning PO. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you tonight, Cameron?
I'm doing pretty good. As you and I were saying before we decided to record, I'm really hoping we get to Friday, but at the same time, despite everything that's going on with the Broncos season, I'm still trying to, smell roses, I guess, like be optimistic with everything that's going on. And unfortunately, it's not been that way because the Broncos are 0-3, and we have a Thursday night game that the national media now will have the chance to see on NFL Network between the Broncos and the Jets. I'm sure, like everybody else has been wanting, was a great national media game of the Broncos and the Jets, I'm sure. But, it's one of those things that it's just an unfortunate situation right now, and I think that there were so many expectations with this Broncos team, Shelby, that it was just like, at least on the surface, like there were expectations, like once all the Pistons were firing and, and everything with this young offense, like there was this opportunity of them being playoff contenders. I mean, myself and Matty had predicted the Broncos would be like that borderline wild card contender team to go into the playoffs. But at the same time, it isn't all that surprising to see the stuff unfold in a pandemic, like all these injuries and everything unfold. And, as we were touching on, that's probably been the most disappointing thing from now until the Jets game. It's just been all these injuries. But nonetheless, before we go into the New York Jets game, I want to get your thoughts, Shelby, of as far as like, what's unfolded these last 3 weeks.
Okay. So there's so much to unpack here. Like you said at the beginning of the segment, that there was a lot of expectations for this team coming in. Everybody was excited about the draft class. We had some really good free agency signings, like Jarrell Casey managed to bring back Shelby Harris for at least another year, drafted Jerry Jeudy. People were excited about Lloyd Cushenberry, Phillip Lindsay, Drew. We were finally going to get to see a full season of Drew Lock, or so we thought. And, everybody actually, I think everybody thought that this was for sure a wild card favorite. I mean, even the national media, guys like Colin Cowherd were jumping on Denver's bandwagon. And to me, that's what jinxed us. It was Colin Cowherd. I blame him. This is his fault. But, of course,
yeah,
as Broncos country knows, as we're all going through together right now, these injuries, they just keep piling up. And it's like, is this even real life right now? Like, we say this could not get worse, and then it gets worse.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like comedic at this point, right? I mean, like, and that's really bad to say. Like, but you get 30% of your roster. I mean, that was the statistic that we found, right? I mean, it was at 30% of the roster, and I believe it was 53 million, according to what Mike Liss was saying. Like 53 million of the players on the Broncos team is on IR, and like the second team below that was Dallas, right? And then one of the things that you had mentioned was half of that was Sean Lee, with everything that he had with his contract. So, I mean, it's just absurd with the amount of injuries and everything that they've had, that the Broncos have had that type of injuries unfold. and have that amount of money tied to all those players that are injured.
Absolutely. And, I know a lot of Twitter is a dumpster fire right now. I think everybody can agree on that. It has been a very wild week on Twitter, and it only continues to pile up as we lose games. And, I've seen a lot of people pointing fingers. Sorry, I misspoke on that. At our strength and conditioning staff. Mm-hmm. I am gonna dispel that right now, that this is no way their fault. I think our strength and conditioning staff is very good. It's the not having a preseason. I mean, Denver might be getting hit the hardest with injuries out of any team in the league, but as we've seen, and we had an especially brutal week 2 around the league, this is not the only team that it's happening to. The 49ers have had a terrible go of it this season. They lost Nick Bosa week 2. Week 2 that was, I think, pretty bad for the entire league. Drew Lock, Nick Bosa, Saquon Barkley, Nick Bosa, both done for the year. Drew Lock, we still might not see for a few more weeks. And if I brainstormed on it for a minute, I probably could think of way more people that were out just that week 2 alone.
Yeah. And that was one of the quick things we touched on, like on the last episode too, that it feels like in a pandemic and everything going on, it's just that type of thing that just needs to be reinforced, this so often, because, and I understand typically in an original year, in a typical year, they're going to say, oh, injuries, like you guys are using this as an excuse. It's not necessarily an excuse this year because there were no preseasons. Like there wasn't anything to work on timing. There wasn't anything to just work on team chemistry. And obviously the players won't say that because, they won't say those types of things. But for our sake and for everything that we're seeing, it's clearly evident with not just the Broncos, but the 31 other teams. They really did need a preseason really badly. And so for anybody that is clamoring for at least the blame of that to be on the strength and conditioning staff, I think it is absurd because there's no way in anyone's right mind that they could have predicted that, especially you mentioned week 2, Shelby. Like no one could have predicted everything that unfolded with like 5, 6, 7 of those injuries that happened on week 2 being ACL injuries or something like that. Like just an absurd number. Mm-hmm. I mean, you cannot predict ACL injuries even at the very least, really. I mean, and so it's just insane to me that people are throwing around blame and just saying things that's just like, oh, here comes another Broncos injury. I guess, we really need to start questioning Lauren Landau and this strength and conditioning staff. And it's just like, why? Like, I just why? Like, with everything that's unfolded.
Yeah, it's so crazy. And it just so happens to be Denver that's getting absolutely smoked by this, We unfortunately got the devastating blow that Jarrell Casey tore his bicep actually in week 2 and aggravated it badly enough against Tampa Bay that he will miss the rest of the season. And then we learned yesterday that Elijah Wilkinson is going to be placed on injured reserve and his year might be over. And, I think a lot of people had some really unnecessary things to say about that, as we know that Elijah Wilkinson has struggled very badly this season. He has definitely not played well enough, but it's still a devastating blow because at this point you're losing bodies, mm-hmm. You're losing people. It's a next man up mentality for guys like DeMar Dotson, but what happens if he gets hurt? Even if someone's not playing at the level you'd like them to, it's still better to have them available on the sideline than not.
Yeah, and for anybody, because I mean, I'm not going to speak for the entirety of Twitter, but as you know, social media is just such a divisive place that there's probably, at the very least, someone on Twitter that would have said that, okay, with the injury to Elijah Wilkinson, that it's a good thing. I mean, basically in phrasing it that way, that him getting injured is a good thing, or in essence, like sub tweeting or whatever, like that rooting for an injury was a good thing. And that is just, to me, is just so wrong. Like, and I just think that any sort of discussion like that, like was Elijah Wilkinson having a great year? No. I mean, he was not having a great year. Could the Broncos probably handled it maybe a little bit better, and maybe done some substitutions and put DeMar Dotson in there? Yeah, I think that those are conversations that certainly will need to be had, of course. But to say that, that that this is like the best outcome that they could possibly have, I mean, we honestly still don't know that, because they could throw DeMar Dotson in there, and obviously that's a given at this point because he's going to be the starting right tackle. But at the same time, we don't know whether, with the amount of time that he wasn't as starter at right tackle, his timing might end up being off to where it's like you're going to get the play that you see at right tackle from DeMar Dotson.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely.
Yeah. And so I guess that kind of like takes us a little bit more now as far as like previewing the Jets game here on Thursday night. Despite probably everything that unfolded as far as with that potential injury, we're probably looking at that right side being a key matchup. What are some of your key matchups heading into this game, looking at the Broncos and the Jets?
I think it is kind of a miracle. I'm just going to start off with saying that I think it's kind of a miracle that Denver is still favored by a little bit of a margin. It's not very big, but Denver is still a favorite to win this game for now.
Yeah, what is it, 2 or 3? Was it like 2 or 3 or something like that?
Yeah, 2.5 or something. 2 or 3, basically what you said. But it's a big key for Denver in this game is to stay healthy. That's my key to winning the game. But of course, you have to think about Sam Darnold. I think a big matchup here is, and I think this was said in our predominantly orange chat earlier this week, that this is going to be a very big opportunity for Bradley Chubb. Of course, we've seen Bradley Chubb kind of have a slow start to the 2020 season. And unfortunately, I think we've seen some unnecessary things said about him on Twitter as well. And of course, I think we have to keep in mind that he is still recovering from his ACL injury. And as other people have said, having experienced it themselves, it's a very hard thing to come back from. It's a hard recovery. To me, it's probably better that he was not going 100% in the first 3 weeks, because the last thing that Denver can afford is to lose Bradley Chubb again too. But I think this would be a good breakout game for him. I think if you get to Sam Darnold, you completely shut them down.
Yeah. And I was kind of talking a little bit about it like this on when I was on the Jets podcast, but it's like, not to take a shot at Sam Darnold when I was saying it, but you have to make him see ghosts. You have to make him see ghosts in the Thursday night game. Like you have to create so much pressure to Sam Darnold, make him uncomfortable so that you can actually make him see ghosts. And maybe that'll start with Bradley Chubb on the left side. And obviously we got news on Wednesday that the Broncos promoted Derek Tuszka again, to maybe add some potential depth and speed rush, if they so chose with that. The pass rush has been left a lot to be desired lately. And a lot of that pass rush that the Broncos were creating was from the interior. Guys like Jarrell Casey, Mike Purcell, and Draymond Jones. A lot of that pass rush was really just being created from those guys, with some help from the linebackers, guys like Alexander Johnson, to a certain extent as well. But it'll be really interesting to see what the Broncos do to try and kind of maximize that. I mean, I think that Bradley Chubb will need to have a big game. I think that the other big key will be the middle of the field, of course. I mean, because I think that, when you look at from the middle of the field perspective, guys like Josie Jewell, while he's had really good moments this year, there's just still times where he's slightly behind the tight end, or it just just maybe just one step behind as far as the tight end. And if he can, get a little bit closer on guys like Chris Herndon and that, I think that the opportunity for the middle of the field to be less of a problem will be there. But I mean, I just think that the middle part of the field will be a little bit of an issue still, because they do have a decent tight end in Chris Herndon.
I think that's a very good point. And going back to your comments on Josie Jewell, I think it's fair to say that this team as a whole has not really clicked on all cylinders yet. We have not really seen either any of the phases of the game play a complete game. I think the defense has probably played with the most efficiency so far. Special teams has been a dumpster fire. I think this was the same story as last year. The offensive line has been a dumpster fire as per last year, but Garett Bolles has played very well. I am very happy to see what's been going on with Garett Bolles this year. I think he came into this season with a very big target on his back. Of course, Denver did not pick up his 5th-year option, so he's kind of got to play for his career here. If he were to have played another rough year this year and him and Denver part ways, how many teams were going to be willing to take a flyer on him? I'm really happy to see that he is maybe changing his narrative, and hopefully, if things continue at the trend they are, he stays in Denver next year.
Let me ask you this question, Shelby, because it's something that I've thought about, and something we actually talked a little bit about in our Slack channel with the other guys. Would it be fair? And obviously it's really hard to get out the crystal ball and actually predict a scenario like this. But if Garett Bolles continues, because one of the biggest things in his career with the Broncos had been starting out fast. And right now he's starting out fast. He's playing great. He's one of the top 5 based on Pro Football Focus, one of the top 5 tackles in the NFL right now. It continues, should the Broncos at a point of this regular season, maybe that's right now, maybe that's week 12 or week 8 or week 17 or what have you, should the Broncos consider re-signing Garett Bolles to an extension, and what in your mind would be a decent enough extension for him?
Oh man, that is a very tough question. So like you said, it's so hard to make a call on that because we don't know how the next few weeks is going to roll out. If he starts getting hit with false starts and starts getting hit with holding calls again, the Twitter GMs are going to be with their pitchforks again. If he plays at the rate that he's playing now, I think that it would be definitely worth revisiting. I don't know if you would want to get that deal done while you're still in season. Of course, I think this team is going to have a lot of decisions going into free agency. I don't know if I see Garett Bolles being a number 1 priority. If he balls out the rest of the season, he sure could be. Your number 1 priority has to be Justin Simmons. The Broncos now have a decision to make on Jurrell Casey. I know you guys talked about it on the show with Brandon yesterday that Maddie had felt that perhaps we have already seen Jurrell Casey in his last game as a Bronco. And unfortunately, I'm kind of agreeing with Maddie on that. I don't know if they will pursue another contract with him, barring that he got injured so soon. And of course, his age plays into that as well. I don't know if they'll take another year deal on him. I'd like to see them do it. Our defensive line has taken quite a brutal beating. So I think it would be worth retaining him. Of course, you have to keep in mind that going into this next offseason, now we have to make another decision on Shelby Harris. If Garett Bolles plays at the rate he has been, and we even saw this at the end of the 2019 season, those last 3 games were very pivotal for Garett Bolles. Mm-hmm. So this was a trend that we saw starting at the end of what was a very rough 2019 season for him. Once Drew Lock was at the helm, the offensive line seemed to click a little better, and that started with Garett Bolles. And he has kind of been on the uptrend, and I'd like to see that continuing. And if that continues, then yes, I think they should revisit giving him an extension. I don't know what a fair extension would be, but I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that it just depends on where the priority's at, because obviously if they decide to ink Garett Bolles in the season at any point in time, that would mean, or at least on the surface, that Bolles was their first priority. It doesn't necessarily mean that. I mean, we saw them sign Andy Janovich before Justin Simmons signed his franchise tag. That doesn't necessarily mean, that Justin Simmons was not their top priority. It just means that they just happened to get a deal done with Andy Janovich, and obviously the rest is history there. I mean, he's not a Denver Bronco anymore. But But I mean, as far as Garett Bolles, I think it just depends on where the Broncos feel comfortable with, and where Bolles more importantly feels comfortable with, And I just think that if you're the Broncos, and if you're looking at it from just the pure standpoint of his performance, and when you're looking at the contract situation, you unfortunately, because it's Bolles, you have to look at the last 3 years as well. And so you can't exactly look at it from the standpoint, and this is really the Broncos that can, or at least are the only team that can look at it this way. So if I'm looking at it, I would probably give him a fair, probably below market deal at least on the surface. And if I'm Garett Bolles, at least on the side of that, I'm probably taking that deal. That said, left tackle is a very desperate position in the National Football League. So if a team offered him a very lucrative deal, if he hit the offseason, because it appears that the left tackle market will be pretty dry in free agency next year, then there's a possibility that a team could look at giving him a huge contract. So I just think it just depends on where the Broncos and where they truly feel, and Bolles himself feel. But I think for the Broncos' sake, just the Broncos' sake alone, I think it would solve a lot of their internal priorities. Like internal priorities as far as in getting Bolles done immediately, because then you can now turn your focus to, okay, we're going to franchise tag Justin Simmons, maybe get him signed to a contract extension, because regardless, I think that whether they ink Justin Simmons to a franchise tag or not, you're looking at it from the standpoint, if he signs the tag, more than likely or not, he'll hold out, which means a contract extension seems likely, or very likely in that scenario. So, I mean, and then of course you still have the I'm kind of rambling, but anyway, and then of course you have the other priorities too, of Bradley Chubb, Cortland Sutton coming up, so I think that just them getting Bolles done may seem like the number one priority on the surface, but if they can get him done immediately, or at least during the regular season, depending on what happens, then it frees up the stuff that they really would like to do in the offseason.
Very, very good points. I agree.
Yeah. Do you think that they do turn to Justin Simmons briefly? I mean, do you see him in a Broncos uniform? I guess that's probably do you see him in a Broncos uniform in 2021 and beyond?
Let me start out by saying I will cry myself to sleep for all season of 2021 if he is not a Denver Bronco. And of course, going back to the conversation that's been on Twitter, everybody feels that Justin Simmons has had a bit of a slow start to the 2020 season, but who have we not said this about at this point? I mean, really. We saw him struggle a little in game one. He played very well against Pittsburgh. Got his first interception that game. And then, everybody kind of calmed down about him again. And then, week 3 was bad for everybody. And that kind of got everybody back in an uproar. But Justin Simmons is our best defensive player. You need to take care of your in-house guys. You're letting a potential perennial player in Justin Simmons and an upstanding guy.
Yep.
You're letting somebody with amazing character, and that's done a lot for the city of Denver. He's a great teammate. He's a great leader. I don't see any reasons as to why they would not want to get a deal done with him.
Yeah. You're talking to, I know there's a person on Twitter that claims himself to be the biggest fan, but I at least am a huge fan of Justin Simmons. And I firmly believe that he should be a Denver Bronco in 2021 and beyond. They need to do everything they can to lock him up. But yeah, I think it will be interesting. And kind of going back a little bit too to the New York Jets game too with this Thursday game, I think speaking for Simmons, I mean that entire defense will have to turn the ball over. I mean, you mentioned Justin Simmons on the interception. I mean, I think that will be one of those keys, and they will have to not just pressure Sam Darnold, but they're going to have to create turnovers as well.
I agree. I think that turnovers are a pivotal part of the game. I think they're going to have to create more pressure. I mean, I think about the 2019 season. Going into week 4, Denver had 0 sacks, and I'm not exactly sure where are we with sacks as of right now. I can think of at least 2.
I want to say it's fairly low. Like it is fairly low. And it's been one of the things that has been kind of got me in the back of my mind thinking you might be worth reaching out to Cameron Wake and Terrell Suggs and Clay Matthews again. So
let's give Clay Matthews an apology letter and send him a gift basket, and maybe he'll reconsider.
Yeah, let's send him a gift basket. Absolutely. Let's give him the deal that he wanted and and bring him in here. Let's make it happen.
I'm all for this. Big Clay Matthews fan over here. I was a little heartbroken to see that we had attempted to get a deal with him done and it didn't happen. And that in the general consensus was the asking price was a little too low and Denver wouldn't budge on that. And that kind of seemed to be the theme as it came out that Denver had tried reaching out to some more pass rushers and they just couldn't get a deal done. And think John Elway's replies on Twitter probably got pretty full.
Yeah. It's not an actual voicemail box, but I'm sure his Twitter mailbox reached maximum capacity. And so as far as the offensive side of the ball, Shelby, one of the things we touched on in the last podcast was the quarterback position, the elephant in the room. As I was saying, and with Brett Rippon, we did a little bit of a poll question for that particular episode, and we shared it on Wednesday. What is your over and under? Because I mean, he's going into this Jets game, right? Like he's going into this Jets game as the starter. Fangio did mention, that there's a possibility we may be seeing 2 quarterbacks, and you of all people know. I mean, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. Just kind of being associated
Yep.
with a high school football coach. I mean, if you have two quarterbacks, you have none. And is this a good idea? Is this a really good idea?
To feature two quarterbacks
To feature two
potentially.
quarterbacks.
Well, my next question would be, who is the second quarterback going to be? Because I can answer my question a lot more efficiently if it's not Jeff Driscoll.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be probably the $1 million question. Obviously, it's probably going to end up being Jeff Driscoll because Fangio had mentioned, right? And actually, you had mentioned it too. You had mentioned that it's probably not going to be Blake Bortles. That was something you were expecting, right? I mean, like, you weren't expecting it to be Blake Bortles.
Yes. I just think that and like I said to you guys in the predominantly orange chat, that I thought it would be very unrealistic and very unfair to put that on Blake Bortles' shoulders, learning an entire offense in a week and a half, essentially. But I would not be against him being active and potentially being needed to come in for relief if Brett Rippon looks like Jeff Driscoll did last week. Yeah. If you would have told me even a month ago that I was going to be begging for Blake Bortles to be starting for the Denver Broncos, I would not have believed you, and I probably would have cried. I think I've already mentioned crying on this show quite a few times, and we are only 32 minutes in, so that's a pretty good summary of how the 2020 season, I think, is going so far. But, and on my weekly stock report that I do for Predominantly Orange, which I still haven't put up for this week because there really isn't one. Shelby Harris played very well. That's pretty much my stock report for week 3. And of course, Noah Fant has played well too. I've been so excited to see Noah Fant's progress. But going back to the quarterback situation, I had some very kind words for Jeff Driscoll for keeping Denver in the game up until the end against a very talented Pittsburgh team, a very good defense. And then he made me eat my words against Tampa Bay, which, granted, Tampa Bay's defense might even be better. I knew that this game was going to be Shaq Barrett's homecoming. I knew Shaq Barrett was going to come in and wreck shop. Would not debate it with anybody. He had been looking forward to this game, and, not because there was any ill will when he left Denver. I think most Denver fans still have a lot of love for Shaq Barrett. I know I do. I obviously hated it being against my team, but I was so happy for his performance on Sunday. He's a great guy. It was just unfortunate that he had to leave Denver, but of course, and I think you guys discussed this on the podcast either a few episodes ago, but he wanted to go somewhere where he was going to start. We knew that we knew that he was not going to start in Denver over Von Miller or Bradley Chubb. It just ended up being very tragically ironic that he went somewhere he could start and then Bradley Chubb tore his ACL. That was just terrible luck for Denver. But, he got the sack title last year. It was a very good year for him. He got robbed of Defensive Player of the Year. That is a hill I will die on.
Yeah. So going back to the quarterback position, I think that one of the keys for Thursday will be those offensive playmakers. Like, Rippon will need to get the ball out to some of those young playmakers. What are you looking forward to going into Thursday's game? One of the things I mentioned to the Jets guy that I was on with the podcast with was this has the opportunity, and granted, the term breakout usually applies to like a team that is better than them, and maybe or just potentially just those games where they just absolutely just go bonkers. Like we just saw The former LSU wide receiver go nutso in the weekend. This last weekend with the Minnesota Vikings, Justin Jefferson had 7 catches for like 170 yards and 2 touchdowns or something like that. Is this potentially either a Jerry Jeudy breakout game, Shelby, that could help out Brett Rippon, or is this a KJ Hamler, I want to go fast, breakout game with Brett Rippon, or are we going to look at maybe both?
My question for you, and I'm not as well studied up on the Jets as I probably should be. They've had such a drastic roster turnover. They've kind of blown up shop a couple times. Where is their secondary ranked so far this season?
They're pretty low. I mean, it's pretty low. Yeah.
I know they're kind of considered bad in just about every aspect of the game, but you've got, of course, we are going to be missing Courtland Sutton all season. He's that big physical receiver. That is a matchup nightmare for a corner. But then you have guys like Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler who are so speedy. They could be tough for these corners to have to deal with, because if you try and shut down one, you still have another. You have Noah Fant, very big, very physical. He reminds me of a young Rob Gronkowski, and I'm not saying he's going to be Rob Gronkowski, but the build reminds me of him. It's way too early to say that. I sure hope he's going to be, but so if they shut down one, then you got the other. I would really like to see this be a good game for both, because if both have a big game, we're probably going to win. But I think this would be a good opportunity for Jerry Jeudy to have a little bit of a breakout game. Of course, we've seen that he has struggled with his hands a little bit so far in the season. He's dropped a few really pivotal passes. And that's something that we're not super used to seeing, because Courtland Sutton has very good hands. Jerry Jeudy's route running is absolutely out of this world, but that doesn't help if he doesn't catch the ball, because he's not running the route if the ball hits the turf. Of course, that was a very, I don't even know why I said that, but it would quiet a lot of the doubt on Jerry Jeudy. And of course, he's a rookie. It seems that when we have the rookies that need to come in and play right away, some really unrealistic expectations are thrown upon them. And we have to consider, of course, KJ Hamler and Jerry Jeudy are both rookies. They are both rookies that did not get a preseason. There was no OTAs. Training camp was limited. And of course, training camp had to look a little different this year because of the pandemic. So this is a very bizarre year to be a rookie. There's going to be a little bit of a struggle for all these guys going in.
Yeah.
I think he's playing exactly where I would expect so far, but I would like to see him have a very good game tomorrow night.
We're still looking for our first Jerry Jeudy touchdown.
Yes.
And I think that's probably a little bit surprising. Like if you were to tell me, going into week 4, would Jerry Jeudy not have a touchdown? I would probably be really, really surprised, and I am really, really surprised. And so I just think that, I think that this would be a really good game for Jerry Jeudy. And we say so often to be patient, right? And one thing in particular, if there's one. And obviously, the word "patient" is such a trigger word lately with Twitter. But if there's one area where you should absolutely be patient, or just tell yourself that I'm going to be patient with this, is Jerry Jeudy. You were talking you were talking about Courtland Sutton, and everybody and their mother was talking about Courtland Sutton last year, or his rookie season, just how he was struggling with his drops. He was struggling with his route running. I mean, it wasn't just one thing that Sutton was struggling with or anything else. Like, it was one thing or another. And And for Judy, there's really only one thing he's struggling with this year, and it is the drops. And if you go back and you look at what Sutton had worked on coming into this second season, which was last year, he really came into his own. I mean, his hands got better, his route running got better. He became, in by argument's sake, a top 5 wide receiver. I mean, and now you look at Jerry Jeudy, if he can just really fix his drops, I mean, there's no telling where he will go as a wide receiver, because we know his route running is crisp. We see the explosion after the catch. So I would just implore people, if you're listening to this podcast, to just please be patient. Listen to Shelby and I. Be patient. Be patient with this. Jerry Jeudy will be fine.
I think, going off of what you said, I think, patience is a virtue that a lot of Twitter is not really having any time for right now. And I understand this is extremely frustrating. If Denver misses the playoffs this year, and at the trend we're already going, it's not looking so good. Of course, we're still only going into week 4. I am not going to say that Denver is not going to make the postseason yet, but if Denver loses tomorrow night, it's going to be very hard. As if Denver loses tomorrow night, they've already taken a significant fall back in the division and have already lost to a couple potential wild card players. As we know, I anticipate Baltimore is going to win the North. So Pittsburgh is definitely going to be a wild card team. Tennessee or Houston potentially could flip-flop in there. I don't know about Indy or Jacksonville. It's that could be a tough division. It could be. I expected, and of course, this is not the Broncos team we were thinking we were going to be watching in 2020. I expected the AFC West to be one of the toughest divisions, if not the toughest. And so far, it's not playing out that way. Of course, we knew that none of the following 3 teams were probably going to keep pace with Kansas City. As we expected, the Chargers are going through some growing pains. Unfortunately, the Chargers have already been hit with the injury bug, and that's an every year thing for them, and then that's unfortunate. We don't wish for injuries, even on a divisional rival. The Raiders have looked pretty good, and I know nobody wants to hear that. I think they're going to be a wild card player.
Yeah, it'll be a very interesting. I mean, we already saw a few baseball teams. I mean, if we're going to go baseball, we saw a few baseball teams slide into the postseason. No one even saw coming. The Miami Marlins, of all teams, are in the MLB playoffs. Like, it's such a bizarre year. It would not surprise me if, of all the years, an Oakland Raider team, went into the playoffs this year. Like, it just seems like it's just been that weird of a 2020. So one of the things I had just thought of, because you like doing this and I like doing this, before we kind of wrap up the show a little bit, with it being Thursday night, and it'll be kind of a trend that I'll do maybe even with this podcast going forward, what would be some of your bold predictions?
Sure.
What would be some of your bold predictions for the for some of your or for this particular game against the New York Jets?
Let's say, this is tough. And this might not be such a bold prediction, because this has already started out to be a little bit of a speculation. So I'm going to go with bold prediction number 1. Adam Gase loses his job if the Jets lose tomorrow night. He is fired by week 5. I'm not sure. I believe that has happened before. I believe that there have been coaches that have been fired pretty early on in the season. I know it's not very common, but to me, with that already being speculation, our big media guys like Rapp and Shefty both had kind of reported that his job could be in danger if they were to lose tomorrow night. I don't know if we're particularly surprised by that. There's been a lot going on over in New York for a few seasons. I think Adam Gase proved pretty quickly that he is probably not the guy. I don't know if he's head coach material. And, that's so surprising because he was so successful in Denver with Peyton Manning. But I think he might be one of those guys that just isn't translating to be a head coach. We kind of saw that with Wade Phillips. Mm-hmm. Brilliant defensive mind, but he just didn't always transfer into head coach material. Might be seeing that with Adam Gase. But, there was some reports even coming from players that they don't practice very hard, and whether that was meant to be a shot at Adam Gase or not, I would say probably not, but that's how it comes out. If you're not practicing hard, if your practices aren't efficient, that's falling back on your coach. And because I think he discredited that report pretty quickly on, but that was coming from his own players.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about coaches that are just as far as just coaches in general that are just groomed to potentially be like an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, that kind of thing. We saw it a little bit too with Rex Ryan as well, another former Jets head coach that, if we're being honest, is probably at the point in time, he's out of the league right now. But I mean, it just that type of coach that is just well suited for a defensive coordinator position. And we saw that with Wade Phillips. You brought it up. I mean, he was a really good, at the time, probably a pretty decent Broncos head coach. But I mean, just over the course of his career, he really just molded himself into one of the best defensive coordinators the league's ever seen, and molded, in my opinion, and your opinion, of course, I know I'm speaking for you, but the best defense that we've ever seen in 2015 with the Broncos defense. But there are coaches like that. I mean, there are legitimate coaches like that. And I will say this, there are a few Jets fans that I've spoken to, and obviously doing the at least appearing on the Jets podcast, I can firmly say with confidence, apparently, after doing that podcast and talking with these guys, apparently 99% of Jets fans are rooting for the Broncos on Thursday night. Because
that's rough.
Because they are rooting for them because obviously they want Adam Gase fired. So they are simply just rooting for the Broncos because they want Adam Gase fired after the game on Thursday. So so I guess for certainty, will be a lot of people, whether at MetLife or whatnot, and they're wearing gang green or what have you, but they will be rooting Broncos. I am 100% sure if they're in the stands for the small amount of fans that are at least in MetLife.
Sure. And then another, and this maybe isn't so much a bold prediction, but another prediction that I am going to throw out there is that Michael Ojemudia is going to get his first career interception. He's played very well so far, in my opinion. He has been robbed of a couple opportunities thus far, and I think he is going to get the job done this week, and he might even go for 2. Let's put him down for 2 interceptions on the day. Maybe we'll throw one into a pick 6 too.
Whoa. You're starting to learn from the Cameron Parker hot takes that I've done so regularly. That's I like it. That is the definition of bold. So 2 interceptions from Michael Ojemudia, and one of them being a pick 6. I heard that right?
You did, and then I wanted to take you back down memory lane for a second, mentioning, so we talked earlier in the podcast, and you had mentioned that a key to winning this game is going to be creating some turnovers, right, which is another thing that the Denver defense has struggled with a little bit. And, I mentioned, of course, that my bold prediction is that Ojemudia is going to get a pick 6. I don't know about you, but I really miss our no-fly zone defense when we could almost guarantee that we were going to get a pick 6 in a game, whether it was going to be at the hands of Chris Harris Jr., Aqib Talib, TJ Ward, Darian Stewart. I miss those certainties in life.
Yeah, and obviously it's that old adage, right? I mean, you really don't want to relish in the past, and then I guess that's kind of like where we are, as sad as things have been. That's about the only thing that we can be gravitating towards, unfortunately. But then, yeah, the no-fly zone. I mean, if you think about it, they were able to create turnovers really at any point in time during a season. I mean, I think one of my favorite turnovers, ironically enough, was the running back that was a former Denver Bronco and probably was not treated all the best, just with opportunities and everything, was the Jamal Charles, right? So, I mean, the fumble that they had on Thursday Night Football appropriately, and I believe it was like 13 seconds left, 14 seconds left or something, and it was a tie ball game, and Jamal Charles fumbled the ball. Bradley Roby scooped it up and scored with like 5, 6, 7 seconds after, something like that. But it was just one of those things with that particular defense that made them so elite and so great that they could just turn that switch as far as turning the ball over on an appropriate time, take that appropriate chance with execution and appropriate execution to really make a play. Yeah, I agree. I do miss the no-fly zone.
I would have to say one of my favorite, and I've said this in the group chat many times, and I tell my husband this all the time because he hates to hear it. But one of my favorite pick sixes that happened in the no-fly zone era was that famous one of Chris Harris's in the Coliseum against the Raiders. I want to say that was back in 2015 as well. And the photo of this pick six has become one of the most famous photos in Denver sports. Of course, as we know, Chris Harris has taken it to the house, and the most interesting part of the picture is that we have a lot of fans. We have a lot of Raiders fans reacting to the pick six with a certain finger motion, and it's happening all over the stadium, and it makes for such an epic picture.
Yeah, and it was just one of those things. I think it was a key moment of the game too. Like like they were getting ready to drive, they were getting ready to score, and then Chris Harris
that kind of
sealed it. Yeah. I believe it was like 16-10 or something like that. It was like something where it was like a one score game, and Harris made the interception, and like almost eerily similar, not on the 1 yard line, but just the interception of Joe Flacco where he took it into the end zone. Yeah, it was just one of those things that just kind of eerily similar that really flipped the script on the game and everything. For me, as far as bowl predictions, I will say that Noah Fant will have. Okay, this is going to sound completely bold and insane.
That's what we're here for.
The Broncos will have 2 100-yard receivers on Thursday night.
I'm here for it.
So one will be Noah Fant. I think that Noah Fant will be one of the 100-yard receivers. And I say that it's too hard to predict this, but I will say it will either be Jerry Jeudy or KJ Hamler who will be the other 100-yard receiver. And one of them or both will have a touchdown. In fact, that'll be my second part of a bowl prediction. I say that Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler will get a touchdown. Both of them. I say Jeudy and Hamler will get a touchdown.
I'm here for that. What do you expect for the ground game on Thursday?
Well, I'll tell you right now, I don't want them to be. I saw this stat on Twitter today. I believe it was the Jets have yet to allow. The Jets have yet to allow a 15-yard run at all this year. I hope that does not happen. I hope that does not happen. And with the should I say the Broncos, and with their current lack of depth right now at defensive line, I hope it doesn't happen. But I just think that there's just probably just too much lacking right now on the Jets running game that defensively, they should at least do their job responsibly. I mean, despite the fact that we'd seen the stuff with Vic Fangio, and the time management and just everything else with defensively, it seems as if that the Broncos, and with the defensive schemes and defensive stuff that's been done by Fangio, he's still doing a pretty good job. I mean, he's kept them close in games, and really the only game that was not close this year was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game. And if Fangio unfortunately falls flat on his face as far as the coaching stuff on Thursday night, that's not going to be a good look for him, and especially with the Jets and everything else. So I think they do put a huge emphasis on stopping the run, and as far as on the offensive side of the ball and with the run, this kind of combats a little bit my bold prediction. I'm not going to lie, but but I would not be surprised if the Broncos, because of Brett Rippon, if they rely heavily on the running game, whether it's Melvin Gordon or whether it's Phillip Lindsay that is starting alongside Melvin Gordon. He's listed as questionable right now, but I think that's going to be the thing, is if they can just establish a running game and get Rippon comfortable early, I think that'll be the recipe for success.
It would be huge if Phillip Lindsay is good to go this game. I think it would be a good game to ease him back into. You can go with the 1-2 punch with him and Melvin Gordon, even get Royce Freeman in on that a little bit. And, we've seen Royce Freeman featured a little bit here and there. He is not, of course, with the addition of Melvin Gordon to the team, Royce Freeman is not being utilized like one would expect. And, it's been interesting because Royce Freeman was arguably drafted to potentially be the back to take first team reps. And of course, with the instant success of Phillip Lindsay, that kind of got turned on its side. But I think Melvin Gordon's another one that has a lot to prove. Of course, I think the fans questioned this move from the get-go, from when he was acquired, because as we know, Melvin Gordon did have some issues with fumbling the ball with LA. And of course, we saw that come to fruition really early on in Denver. And I think he has made up for that since then. He's still very explosive. It's just another one of those things. It's when the team is not playing well, we're not going to see a lot of good individual performances. I think this is a very good opportunity for the team as a whole to get on their feet. If they are unable to do so, I'm a very pessimistic person. My pessimism is going to come to fruition if Denver cannot get this done tomorrow night. The Jets are known as probably the worst team in the league right now. And of course, Denver has kind of been thrown into that conversation, but it's so and I'm rambling, and I have rambled a lot this evening, but another point that comes up is a lot of people are trying to evaluate the talent of this team right now, and it's not doable. How are we trying to evaluate a team that's on third and fourth stringers?
It goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? And it's kind of like a nice little wrap up, kind of like as we're wrapping up the show, right? I mean, because we talked about injuries, right? We like at the top of the podcast. How can you evaluate a team? And I think that's like the overarching point of all the stuff with the season, and especially with all the injuries itself. Like, is it great to have an NFL season? Absolutely. And is it great to have all these expectations? Potentially, yeah, because at that particular point in time when we're making those expectations, there really was no right or wrong answer as far as our expectations, because it hadn't happened yet. But as far as the injuries that have currently unfolded and everything else, how can you evaluate? How can you evaluate everything that unfolded with the Broncos? I mean, with all the amount of injuries, and if you're a head coach and everything that's being unfolded with, the firing of Vance Joseph, the Vic Fangio crowd. I mean, or even the tank for Trevor Lawrence crowd. I mean, how can you just truly sit there and just say that. And I'm not going to say that obviously if the Broncos lose this game, they lose a lot of these games and they get the number one pick. It's everything's on the table at that particular point. But as far as like the letting go of Vic Fangio and just stuff like this, or just let alone evaluation, you can't evaluate something based off of everything that occurred this year. I mean, because there will be a point in time where Drew Lock comes back, and you have to see what you have in him, and in particular evaluate him. So I mean, there will be that particular point in the season, and everything else that just this whole Broncos season, and in general for the NFL season, they have to evaluate their players. And with all these injuries and third stringers and fourth stringers, just as you mentioned, Shelby, it makes it really, really difficult to evaluate them.
And then my question, and I'm not trying to criticize anybody. I love having Twitter as a platform where you can interact with other fans, and I've had some amazing conversations with lots of Broncos fans. But the tank for Trevor train is leaving the station on Twitter. It's gaining steam. My question for those on board this train is the following. How is drafting Trevor Lawrence going to fix what's going on with the team right now? Is Trevor Lawrence a doctor and is going to heal all these injured players? It's just the correlation to me here doesn't really make sense. Mm-hmm. I think we can all agree that Denver would not be in the position they were right now if they were healthier. I don't know if anyone would even be talking about Trevor Lawrence if Drew Lock was healthy. Of course, the jury is still a little out on what we have in Drew Lock right now. I know some people are really sold on him. I know some aren't. I know some, like me, feel that we have not seen it. What we saw in 2019 was a little bit of a sample size. I think everybody wants to see more before we've decided we found our franchise quarterback. But where does drafting Trevor Lawrence improve what is going wrong with the team right now?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's going to fall on what they truly believe on Lock. And on paper, everything else that's happened in the offseason, on paper, everything that's happened, it's pretty evident they believe in him. I mean, they drafted 2 wide receivers. They signed Melvin Gordon. They signed Graham Glasgow. They drafted Jerry Jeudy. They drafted KJ Hamler. They drafted his best friend from the University of Missouri. And so, I mean, it's clearly evident that the Broncos, on paper, don't like Drew Lock. They love Drew Lock. I mean, it seems pretty evident. But if once you get to that particular point, if you're in the top 5 and there's a quarterback you love, and it doesn't have to be Trevor Lawrence, but if there's a quarterback that they love more than Lawrence or anything else, I mean, it's at that particular point, it's things that you got to consider. And so I think that for the Broncos, it's going to be a lot of those options on the table. And when those chips fall, it's going to end up being, okay, where do they sit on Lock? And I think that as of all the conversation in the offseason, that's unfortunately where it's going to fall. No matter where we sit on week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6, week 7, week 8, whatever have you in the weeks of the regular season, that's exactly where we're going to fall. With the Broncos is where exactly do they feel comfortable with? Because if they find themselves into that conversation, it's going to end up having to be had regardless. Do they take Trey Lance? Do they take Justin Fields? Do they take Trevor Lawrence? Do they take Penei Sewell? That kind of thing. But it's just really unfortunate because I think that, it was one of the things that I had tweeted was just, and it's my problem with the instant gratification crowd. I absolutely love being able to root for my team. And has it been a very difficult season or multiple seasons as a Broncos fan? Absolutely. I mean, I won't be the first person to even tell you, that it's been a difficult season. You can just go look at it all over Twitter, but with the instant gratification crowd just gets to be so toxic that we want fixes immediately. Case in point, DeMar Dotson and Elijah Wilkinson. We want changes immediately. And I think that unfortunately with the instant gratification crowd, it's resulting in, this toxic nature to the point where the trusting of the process that's unfolding, it becomes impatient. It just becomes completely impatient. And I just think that, for Bronco fans, you have to trust it. I hate to use a Colorado Rockies term, but absolutely have to trust the organization. Like, you absolutely have to trust the process that's being unfolded. And if anything that certainly unfolds is with this was the quarterback position, you have to consider it at that particular point in time. But based on the 2020 season, you have to just take your growing pains. And I think that that's one of the things with this Broncos roster, despite the expectations and despite everything else, and especially with this being potentially, in air quotes, a rookie season for Drew Lock, you were going to experience growing pains regardless.
Cameron, you have some very excellent points there, and you stand for a lot of what I believe in. And, Cody Rourke from the Locked On Broncos podcast has said this a few times too. Denver is still in the process of a rebuild. And what I think is kind of going on here is, we as a fan base were extremely spoiled in the Peyton Manning years. That was 4 years of what felt like instant, extreme success. 2 Super Bowls, a Super Bowl title, winning the division every season we had Peyton Manning. It was something that us as Denver fans were not super used to. We got used to it. Peyton Manning retired, and now we're kind of back to square one. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is building something great takes time. Even when we got Peyton Manning, that turned into a bit of a domino effect. Peyton Manning comes to Denver. Now other notable free agents want to come to Denver because they want to play with Peyton Manning. Hopefully what happens with Drew Lock is we build something and Drew Lock works out for Denver to the point of where Denver becomes an attractive place to play because of Drew Lock as a player, Drew Lock as a person. I think that what's going on with the organization right now, and as we saw with last season, Emmanuel Sanders did leave mid-season, and as we know, there was a little bit of speculation there and that there was a little bit of drama that Emmanuel Sanders did not believe in what Denver was trying to build. And you've got to have those players, coaches, everybody on your staff and on your team has to believe in what you're trying to accomplish. That's kind of where Denver is right now. They're still in that building process. I think back to pre-Peyton Manning. I think most Denver fans that were around back in, 2010, 2011, 2009 would agree that being a Broncos fan was not, of course, unconditional love for this team that has really broken our hearts sometimes. That was not the most fun time to be a Denver fan. The Tim Tebow season was absolutely magical. Depending on who you ask, I should say. I'm a big Tebow mania person. I know not everybody was, but I think back to my very first Broncos game. I was a freshman in high school. It was the 2010-2011 season, the season where Denver happened to win 4 games. And that was Kyle Orton's last season as a starting quarterback for the Broncos. There was a pretty talented roster at the time. Of course, we still had guys like Champ Bailey. We had Brian Dawkins on the team. Eddie Royal was still around. It was a pretty good roster, but it wasn't a playoff roster. I mean, of course, you had guys that are playoff caliber, Champ Bailey, Brian Dawkins, Hall of Famer guys. There was, and of course, as a result of that 4-12 record, we drafted Von Miller with the 2nd overall pick, highest pick that the Broncos have ever had in the draft, and I'm kind of hoping it stays that way.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want the number one overall pick because that means we were the worst team in the league. But at that point, prior to Von Miller getting drafted, and of course Peyton Manning eventually coming to Denver in a very blockbuster acquisition in the spring of 2012, prior to that, it did not feel like Denver was headed in a very positive direction. You know, that was a little bit of a turbulent era. Of course, Kyle Orton was disappointing. That was the post Jay Cutler era, which was disappointing. We had just endured the very traumatic Josh McDaniels season, the 2009 season, where we remember that we started out 6-0 and finished 8-8. And I think back to those days a lot as we suffer through heartache over what's going on right now. And I feel that compared to back then, we are in a much better position now than we were at that point, you know, building something that can last.
And at the same time, too, if anybody is feeling, you know, just completely heartbroken with everything that's going on and everything with this Broncos, you know, season, I'm 100% going to say, you know, and I'm sure, you know, you, Shelby, will say the exact same thing. We're right there with you. Like, we're heartbroken as much as the next person. And at the same time, though, we're not the Browns. I mean, we're not the Cleveland Browns. I mean, you know, where the Cleveland Browns endured just losing season after losing season after losing season after losing season after losing season, and just so on and so forth. I mean, we're not the Browns by any stretch of the imagination. It may seem like we are right now, but we are not the new Browns. I mean, they're like, regardless of the fact whether we get new ownership or not, we will not be the Browns.
I really can't help but laugh when people say that. And, you know, I don't know if you are a member of some of the Facebook groups for Broncos fans.
Mm-hmm.
Have to say that it is an extremely toxic environment. If you think what you read on Twitter is crazy, go on a Facebook group and go jump down a rabbit hole for about an hour and a half. You will be very sorry you did it. But I've seen a lot of them. This probably stems back to the 2018 season, maybe even further. Maybe it was even as early as 2016 when we went 9-7 with Trevor Semi. And, you know, that season was actually not too bad, I didn't think. But, you know, I've seen a lot of we're the new Browns, and it's like, you know, Denver has yet to go 0-16. I have yet to see, and of course this year is different because we're not letting as many fans in. I have yet to see, and maybe I just haven't seen them yet. I have not seen any Denver fans coming to games with paper bags on their heads. You've seen that at a lot of Browns games, a lot of Jets games, Lions games. You know, there are some fan bases that I very legitimately feel sorry for.
Yeah.
And that I would send a virtual hug to. And it is Browns fans, because they have endured years of this misery. And, you know, I don't know if an end is in sight for them. I think it is. I think Baker Mayfield is their guy. I just think they need some continuity. You know, Benjamin Albright made a very good point about the Browns, I think last season, when he said, you know, you can't keep firing coaches because you're not getting any continuity there. And of course, you know, Freddie Kitchens was absolutely terrible. So I don't blame them, but hopefully they're headed in a better direction. I feel in honor of our game tomorrow night, I feel very sorry for Jets fans.
Yeah.
They have not had a lot to cheer for.
Yeah, and indirectly, the comment that Albright made is also could be on like the term is evergreen. You know, like we bring it back. I mean, that comment about the Browns could even be said about the Broncos right now. I mean, it's another reason why you cannot let go of Vic Fangio. I mean, it's another reason why you can't let go of Vic Fangio, because once more time again, it's another coach, it's another installment, it's another system. You know, for X amount of years. I mean, the continuity is just being broken for the Broncos. And ever since Gary Kubiak left and stuff, and that's just an unfortunate cycle the Broncos can't be in. When from John Fox to Gary Kubiak to Vance Joseph to Vic Fangio, it's just an unfortunate cycle, and this is just things that can't happen. So yeah, I mean, whether it's the Browns, whether it's potentially the New York Jets, which is going to happen on Thursday night, it's just a very unfortunate situation for both teams, whether it's been the Browns or whether it's been the Jets. And Shelby, it was a real pleasure having you be on the podcast. Like it was absolutely awesome having you join the podcast.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed our conversation.
It was great. And, this won't be the first or last time. This will be many times. Like, you are more than welcome to hop on at any point in time that you feel comfortable, and we'll get you on as often as you like. I will say it is absolutely amazing having you be part of Predominantly Orange. Like, it is absolutely incredible having you be part of Predominantly Orange.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think I speak for everybody there that you have a bright future. And, I mean, you are incredibly talented. I absolutely love the work that you do at PO. So, so the fact that you are also able to even to hop on here is pretty incredible. So thank you for hopping on and previewing this New York Jets game and talking a bunch of other Broncos and NFL discussion too.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an awesome opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so with that will wrap up another edition of the Mainly Broncos podcast. Be sure to go follow Shelby. And Shelby, where can they follow you over on social media?
You can follow me on Twitter at Shelby Manning PO. You can follow me on Instagram if you want to. I don't know my Instagram username, but I don't know if I would be super hard to find. I don't post anything very interesting on there, but if you follow me on Twitter, I talk a lot about the Broncos and other things. So yeah, hit me with a follow if you are interested in hearing my thoughts.
Shelby Manning PO, you heard it there. Shelby Manning PO, and hopefully, her inbox will not reach full capacity. I'm joking. on notifications or anything like that. Hopefully, it won't get like that. But, for Shelby Manning, for myself, you can follow myself at Twitter or on Twitter at Cameron Parker PO. Maddie's not on the show today, but you guys can follow him at Maddie Moles Pod. If you guys are listeners of the program and you guys are listeners over on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, as well as Google Podcasts, and a bunch of the other locations you guys can listen to this, we just want to say thank you so much for listening to the Mainly Broncos podcast. So saddle up with us as we got another episode in store after this New York Jets game. So we have definitely, and as far as National Podcast Day, thank you also to our listeners of the Mainly Broncos podcast for just continuing to just enjoy our content, enjoy our guests and everything. And I think that's been one of the key things for Maddie and I, is just having guests and everything be part of the show. So thank you guys so much for making the Mainly Broncos podcast a part of your guys' daily schedule, daily routine, what have you, whatever fits your schedule. So thank you guys so much for listening to the Mainly Broncos podcast.